Good morning, everybody. We've got the proud mommy Lebang on this morning. We'll tell you why in just a second or two. But good. Well, look, you've always got plenty of reasons if you're a mom to just be happy about your kids because yes, they can be a lot of work, but man, like my brother always says, there's nothing more rewarding in the whole world than
100%.
And for people who don't have kids, like me or like Ryan, we just won't understand that. So I'm not even going to compete with it, which is the whole, that's the whole message there. And Ryan, who is from the West-Rand. And
why do we open with that?
West side.
Just do W. Yeah, West side. There we go.
West
3.
side.
West side.
So the reason we start with that, in fact, this is hilarious. We might as well start here. It's almost Christmas. Oh, by the way, got the Christmas trees up. Look here. Look.
Oh, yay.
Very
nice. All sparkly.
I'll do it. I'll rearrange the studio so at least, we get 1 or 2 shows.
You can see, yeah.
We can see the Christmas tree in the background, which makes it special and nice. By the way, has Jane put up our Christmas decorations? Because I didn't see anything yesterday.
Nope.
I'm not seeing anything.
She does not abide to the 12-day rule.
No.
Clearly.
She really abides to like the, oh shit, we almost at Christmas rule. Yeah.
It's the whoops rule.
Oh shit, it's 12 days.
Well, isn't that Gareth's whole thing?
Yesterday was,
12 days prior to,
I do what I say. Like I said I was going to do this yesterday, and I got home like 8 o'clock last night and had to do it because I had such a long day. So I woke up for the show yesterday morning, and I promise you, I actually got home here at like 8, and I still had to do all of that stuff. But it's done, so I feel good about that.
Good. Well done.
Thank you. But let's get back to Ryan's West Rand Christmas because you guys do things a little differently. Obviously, people don't know this, but if you're on the West Rand, there's like a secret code for everything. How did Christmas begin on the West Rand?
Well, I also got home late yesterday, and then I heard this commotion outside. Like it was just hooting, and I was like, "What the hell? Like, what brawl is going on outside? That there's lights and hooting involved." I mean, it's common, but not. Yeah, like is there a fight? Like what's going on? And it turns out I forgot about this, but every year in my neighborhood they do this. It's like the neighborhood watch kind of gets together, and they wrap Christmas lights on their cars, and they all go together, and they parade around, and then they send like a WhatsApp group out for everyone to come out of their house, and they parade around the neighborhood in this like Christmassy thing, and there's a police escort, and I got like a bit of a video to show you guys. I didn't think you guys saw.
I was about to say I need to see this.
Just a warning. I can
already tell from the Bung's expression. She's like, WTF.
This sounds like the ghetto. It just sounds like the ghetto.
I'm not gonna lie to you. There are some trailers with some kids in it. So just
man. All right.
Look, I do think it's awesome.
Brilliant.
Ladies and gentlemen, here it is for your pleasure this morning. This is a West Rand Christmas for the first time seen by people not from the West Rand. Ryan's breaking the code, but here we go.
Here we go. Still, like, this other part's still coming.
People still make it nice. For kids.
That's my dad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even the police.
Even the police are there. Now have a look at this one. Have a look at this one.
Brilliant.
Wow.
That's amazing.
That is so cool.
I think that's cute. I think that's very, very cool. I like it, Ryan.
I mean,
I
sure,
think
it's like NP200s and a bunch of little buckies, but that's like the cuteness, right?
I think that's very sweet. So this happens every year?
Yeah, this happens every year, and I always miss it because I always forget about it. So yesterday I got home, and I was already like, just kind of settling in at home. And then all of a sudden, everybody's coming out and everyone's on the street like waving, and people are getting their cards and following it around. And I was like, damn, I missed it again. So I managed to just catch a video of it.
I think that's very cool. I really do. And, you could be an asshole and go like, "Oh, this is really stupid" or whatever. But I think it's cute, and I think any way that you celebrate, like yesterday, we were talking with Bakabantu about what used to happen in like Craddock, and who even knew that in Craddock they even understood Christmas. They did stuff in, like Craddock is like such a backwater, right? But here in the West Rand, they've got some serious Christmas spirit going. I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
That's nice. That's nice.
Is this like a regular thing? Like, does this happen in other neighborhoods?
No, it's just the West Rand.
It's honestly just. But I do suspect it's giving a bit of a Boxburgy, Benoni-ish energy as well. So there's a high possibility that if it's happening in the West, there's a chance that in the East we
need to tell some Piwe to just.
We need to ask some Piwe and Aaron to.
Yeah, you know what? I think Lebang's onto something here, because the thing about the West Rand and the East Rand is it's like a horseshoe. They're actually more similar because they're closer to each other, even though the far ends, actually the ends of the horseshoe, the West and East Rand, are actually closer to each other than people think. So the behavior is often, there's often a lot of similarities going on. Let's not kid ourselves, right?
No, definitely. No, that's nice, Ryan. Big ups. I think like next year you can also participate.
No, I was
the
thinking,
lights on the car,
and these kids are just shouting to everyone, "Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas!" I was like, this is quite cool.
That's
nice.
Sweet.
This is the most Christmassy thing I've seen.
That's nice.
That was cool.
So Ryan, did you think we would be mocking you and your West Rand Christmas, because we both are fans clearly of what happens there?
I wasn't sure how it was going to go. I thought it was a 50-50 split on how this thing was going to go, because even when I saw the trailer wrapped in Christmas lights, I was I was like,
it's certainly different.
But A for effort, bro.
Yeah. So
no,
it was cool. I liked it.
You must own it. You must just own it. Shout out to the West.
West Rand. Do love it. So, okay, Lebang, the reason you're a proud mom.
Yes, Gareth.
There's you know what? There's nothing better than giving people a chance to boast about their children, because first of all, I do think that's the ultimate achievement. If anybody's wondering like, whether I'm being sarcastic or not, I'm not. I think, you can say someone is a great person. They've done this, they've done that, they've done the other. But if they've actually raised a little star, that's a whole different story. Then they deserve bonus points. And bonus points do not come from, your kid could spell cat and mat and chrysanthemum. It's like this kind of shit. Like, your son has been selected as a prefect in grades. So that's
wow.
How exciting. Like, I wasn't even a prefect. I was like, damn, okay. Not my genes. But no, definitely it's the kind of thing that really like affirms what you're doing. It's like your work is paying off. The intentional parenting thing that one applies in their daily lives. These are the rewards of it, essentially. I mean, it's not like something that money can buy. You can't go to the store and buy your child's place in a prefect position or whatever the case. Well, I mean, that applies to most of us anyway, but it really just does show that, okay, cool, you're onto something, you're whatever you're doing, it's working, that kind of thing. So it just kind of like boosts your confidence. And of course, as a parent, you love to sit there and gloat, like, my kid got chosen for this and my other one's gonna do that, and you feel really good doing it. So I'm just practicing so that I can do it more often. I'm super, super stoked, very excited.
Well, also, we had the team from Red Hill in the other day, and they were telling us about this thing they've got going there, and they don't have prefects now. I side-eye schools that don't have prefects, because I always think, why won't you let the kids kind of have a hierarchy? Because otherwise, how do they know if they've done well? There's something about like prefects that I was a prefect at school, but I don't know how the hell that happened because I was not a good, like, well-behaved kid. What
But
it did
remember,
is it
they sprinkled in some of the popular kids and some of the really
all
you
the
can
time.
get everybody's attention
Yeah.
kids in there
You
as
know
well.
how? You know how they did that? They do that because otherwise the prefects have no authority. Because if they don't have a little bit of buy-in, like, it has to be a little bit democratic. Because if it's just all
Sure.
the teachers' pets, then all the
Yeah,
kids in
yeah.
the school
It's
are going
lame.
to hate them, and they're just going to rebel against them the whole time. And they go, "Oh, prefects are such
Exactly.
do
Yeah.
teachers, are slickers or whatever."
Yeah.
So that's probably one of the reasons they put me in there because I did not kiss teachers' ass. I was definitely like a disruptive child. I caused a lot of trouble. I was friends with all the bad kids, that sort of shit. So,
But you obviously had some qualities in
Yeah.
you that they saw, like the leadership skills, the
well,
ability to
The
yeah, the drive, the
driver.
passion,
Yeah.
that driver communication thing that you've got, and you can't run away from it. And that's why
I don't know.
at such a young age, it's important to still have those kinds of systems because, in most cases, the kids themselves don't even realize the potential in themselves, but this kind of affirms for them that, hey, man,
Mm,
at this tender age of 12, 13, you can do it, bro. And, you go into high school with that mentality of, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. By the time you're in matric, the world is truly your oyster. So yeah, it's still nice that there are some really, some traditional schools that still have some of these systems in place. I think it's cool.
It's also, let's be realistic about this. Like when you're this is like primary school, right? So
Sure, yeah.
it's not as important. It's not like it's a sure sign that this kid is going to grow up to be the best adult ever. Because
No, of
really,
course.
primary, even at high school, like a prefect doesn't really denote anything. But what it is it's nice for the parents because they kind of realize like their kid is either popular and or a leader and or that they've got something special going on. Um, by the way, for parents whose kids are not prefects, where? No, sorry. What I meant to say was, sorry, I didn't mean that. What I meant to say was that obviously your kid is not a failure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they strong in other areas, but what really took
yeah,
me
sure.
aback was sitting at this prize giving and seeing the top achievers in the school are like ridiculously top achievers. When I say ridiculous, I mean there's a handful of kids, maybe 4 of them in the whole grade, who are getting top of science, top of maths, top of this
Yeah,
80s, 90s.
sure.
And I'm like,
Amazing.
whoa, that's really great because clearly these kids are good at that. And then there's the sports achievers who are just killing it in every single sport.
Yeah.
So it allows for these kids to excel in spaces where they are good. So if there's like music schools, for example, where
Uh,
a child is passionate about music and they're good at that, they can excel at that, etc., etc. I just think it's great for a little kid to be, given that pat on the back, like, hey, you did it, bro, especially if it's something that you were gunning for. And then great start to the year. So I know my Christmas present list is just like quadrupled now. I can't just get away with like just buying, a little bit of this. Now it's like,
now you have to buy all the kids. You see again, you can't
bro,
now like favor the one, right?
I can't.
Oh,
And his little brother's going to grade 5. So he's like, well, my brother's passed. He's going to grade 7 and he's going to be a prefect. That's all good and well, but I'm going to grade 5. So I need a hectic present as well. Now everybody needs something hectic. So it's cute, man. It's great energy. And it's exciting. Like I can brag about this very thing. Put it on my CV. Yeah.
So, this is on a side note here, with something we've brought up so many times on the show, and it really upsets me, is how our beaches in KZN are just such a disaster. And remember we were talking just the other day about how, oh no, they're trying to fix the beaches and they've got their act together. Well, they clearly don't.
No, I think if anything, it's gotten worse. Do you remember like the early 90s, Gareth?
Sorry, 6 of our beaches in Durban are closed.
It's 11 now.
It's 11.
It's gone up to
Holy
11.
shit.
How ridiculous is that?
That literally happened in a
Overnight.
span of days. Yeah.
Yep. And it's all due to high levels of E. coli, which picked up during the water sampling. E. coli, yeah, which they were sampling all the water last week. And they're like, oh, bad in this beach, bad in that beach, bad in every single beach. It's literally ridiculous. There was a time in the early 90s where you knew that it's December time. I can go to Durban, pack my kids in the car, and just have a good time. Now you literally have no option. It's very, very sad.
I don't know if you guys saw, there was a video that was trending on Twitter of there's that water place somewhere in Gauteng that opened like recently within the last year or two. I think it's like Happy Island or something.
Oh.
And they have a wave pool now, like Sun City, I think. But like everybody's gone there for the holidays, and it's so full because everyone's going now to these places.
Where is it called?
I've never heard of this place.
Is it not Munyaka? Munyaka. That's Baldwin property.
Isn't it called Happy Island?
Happy Island. Is it like a water park exclusively?
It's like a water. Yeah.
Happy Island. I just want to say, if it's called Happy Island, that sounds like a mental institution.
Honestly, it does not sound very attractive at
Right.
all.
Here it is, Mzansi Happy Island.
Where is it? Is it not in the West Rand, dog?
Yeah, I don't know where it is. I've been meaning to go there, but I remember it opened when it's still under construction, and I just haven't had the chance to go there. But
so it's packed there now,
and everybody's going there because
it's in Muldersdrift, Krugersdorp.
Oh,
come on, Ryan.
All right. Well,
Ryan.
I didn't know about that, but it is in the West Rand then. It's just so sad. Like KZN's beaches used to be some of the best beaches in the world. Water is warm.
Jeez.
You know, we have families who go there. There's stuff. Ugh.
You could go buy that, like you go waste money at those beach shops. I used to love doing that. We used to go to Scottburgh every year. Scottburgh beaches were the best because the waves were so big, but they weren't like Bolito waves where they would smack you over and like, really make you hit the ground. Like Scottburgh, you could go quite far out and then still.
I really, so Rachel says she's been to Happy Island and she says it's great. Well, thanks, Rachel. Thanks for letting us know. I mean, can't take Ryan's recommendation here. It's really sad. I don't want to dwell on the topic too much more because we have discussed it ad infinitum. But really, the KZN municipalities and provincial government should be ashamed of themselves for turning one of our greatest assets into a terrible liability. And the only reason they're doing that, they're shutting the beaches, is because they know if people get into it, they'll get sick. And it's as bad as the cholera thing that happened in Hammanskraal, and that this should be happening in the year. There are countries that don't even have, Tanzania is not necessarily on South Africa's level in many respects, but Tanzania has clean beaches in places like Zanzibar. And, you think if they can do it, what the hell's wrong with us? Why are we so goddamn useless at so many things? And why is our government so crap that they have to steal 100% of the money? If they stole 20% of it, we'd go,
at least they did something, just some of the work. But all of it? Guys?
No. It's just very upsetting. Anyway. All right, let's move on from that because it'll just depress all of us. And then the Zulu succession battle, another thing we've spoken about all year. This thing is also just such an embarrassment. Like, can you imagine if people were still arguing whether King Charles was king or not?
Yeah.
Like, there's and they've been going for 1,000 years in Britain. The Zulu monarchy is not exactly spring chickens. They've been going for at least 200 or 300 years in their current incarnation. And there are so many millions of people in South Africa who consider themselves Zulu. And for this to be happening where they can't actually figure out who the king is. And I mean, I thought this was settled. And then the Pretoria High Court, because you see, it's not like the Pretoria High Court goes, okay, well, we're going to go and interfere in Zulu customs. It's actually members of the royal family who are using the law to appeal things that they feel they're entitled to.
That was the first mistake.
Yeah, but I mean, now you ask the court, so you've got to abide by the court. And the Pretoria High Court has said that Cyril Ramaphosa's recognition of Misuzulu as king of the country's largest ethnic group is going to be set aside, which means that according to the law, he may not be king. And this is very bad. This is, I mean, there's no two ways about it. This is like not, it makes it look also amateurish and like, we don't know what we're doing. So apparently there's an internal battle going on between Misuzulu and his half-brother, Prince Simakade, over the nomination process and the build-up to the king's coronation in October last year. The prince and the king, or whether he is the king or not, are each in a faction, contesting a series of meetings that saw King Misuzulu ascend to the throne. Contention is that the two meetings that decided his future did not comply with the prescripts of Zulu custom and the Leadership Act. So you see, again, a lot of this stuff isn't written down.
Yeah.
There's like the active succession in places like Britain. I'm not sure about other countries. But then there's a rule that everybody has to follow, including the king. You can't just do what you want just because you're the king.
Sure.
Right?
You know what it feels like? Like if you've got a matter inside your household, right, that concerns you and your family members.
Yes.
Traditionally, what you do is you call up the elders. They all come in, we all sit in the lounge and we discuss it and we solve it right there and then. This kind of feels like this matter was not solved inside the household. So therefore they needed to call the neighborhood. And after they called the neighborhood and that didn't work out, they needed to call other people from further away neighborhoods, people that don't even know what's going on, to come and assist them in this matter. And because they, as the original people in the household, can't get their shit together, it is seriously just looking like a bit of a shit show. Had they just pulled names out of a hat at this stage, rather just pull names out of a hat instead of fighting each other to the death, because that's what's going to happen. Everybody wants to be the boss.
Well, I say, like, let's have a fight to the death then. Let's make this good entertainment. Let's actually get them all dressed up. I mean, you know, this is like Game of Thrones style. Let's have a fight. You want the throne? Let's see who's willing to kill for this thing. And then, you know, King Misuzulu must fight Prince Simakade, and then they can figure out what the hell's going on here.
Netflix is already writing the documentary wherever they are.
Are there no like within the English thing, there's like black suits that kind of tell everyone how things run and they kind of make decisions in the background? Is there nothing like that?
Well, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. There have been many moments in English history where there's been a fight for the throne. I mean, there were the Wars of the Roses, famously. But since about the 1600s, there's been acts of parliament that explain who takes over and how, and et cetera, et cetera. So back in the day, they used to also kill each other and fight, and they didn't go to court. They would go to war. You know, the most famous victory in British monarchical history is probably the Battle of Bosworth, where King Richard III was killed by Henry Tudor, and Henry Tudor became the king and established a brand new dynasty. So it's not as if those people there didn't fight at some point as well. So, you know, this happens all over the world and in various times and places. But like, it's been a while that the Zulu monarchy's been established in South Africa. They should have written down some rules and agreed some basic principles by now. They should have gone like, okay, guys, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we make things happen.
I'm sure they did, but I don't think they had prepared for life after the death of the previous king. I mean, he was the king for a minute. So normally you're not gonna sit and think, what happens when the king dies? Who's gonna take over? They were probably just like mising and just like living in that moment until it happened. Then it's like, crap. Now we have to do something.
Tell me what that means. I don't know what that means. I love that word. I love that word.
It's just like chilling and no action.
Is it like avoiding?
Yeah, it could be that. It's whatever you want it to be.
When you mise someone.
You just mise. It's like, it can be ghosting someone. It could be ignoring. It's just literally just sitting on your loins and doing absolutely nothing.
But I mean, even the Queen had like a plan in place. I mean, there was a whole plan that everyone knew about.
Yes.
Like a whole protocol. Once the bell rang, we all knew.
Yeah, we all knew. London Bridge.
That's it.
Time.
Yeah.
Well, here we are. Good luck to them, I guess.
And if they don't sort it out, then it's just like an embarrassment to the whole Zulu nation because they're like, well, what people think we're just fucking around.
Yeah,
That's what people do. They think
the real thing.
they think they're fucking around. That's the whole thing. It's and then it looks like it's just a greedy fight for money or because that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Power. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's just shit. All right, now Lebang has some other things to tell us about the rand manipulation saga.
Remember,
And,
guys? Remember
well,
a few weeks ago, we were all up in arms. Hey, I'm going to switch banks. Hey. Did you?
Well, I didn't fall for any of this crap because, as I said at the time, there's so many things that come into play. Yes, the banks manipulate the currency for their own ends, but that's what everybody in, like all those currency traders, those people who are constantly posting stuff on Instagram and everywhere else. I've traded. You want to learn how to forex trade? You could just learn from me, and they're all charlatans. They're all crooks.
Yeah, no,
those
they
guys
definitely
are
are all
just as responsible. The difference is that the banks have massive leverage because they trade in such big numbers, right? That's the only difference.
The interesting thing, Gareth, was literally how for all of 2 minutes, everybody was just so up in arms and hurt and they couldn't believe it. Oh no, not my bank. Woe is me. And there was this big, I'm leaving my bank. Where do we all go? Let's switch it up. What? People are giving each other advice. Go to this one, go to that one. I'm just here to do an audit. Has anybody actually switched banks? Or has life just simply continued?
Do you think? What do you think?
Of course not. Of course not.
Correct. So it's all big. I this is another example of people who just make a big noise about fuck all. Really.
Yeah.
People, by the way, people are very loath to switch banks. Hey, it doesn't happen easily because it's such a schlep, such a ball ache. Like, trust me, there are lots of reasons along the way that I've got to hate my bank, and I'm sure you do too. Who goes to sleep at night going, I love my bank, except a moron. We know that they're not there to help you. And in South Africa, we've got X number of major banks, and then there are all these new players in the field as well. But I don't trust any of them, and I don't want to sound like
they're all not great.
No, they're all after your money, and they charge too much, and blah blah blah. That there's at least some competition now, but it's not like it's enough. And I don't trust any of these guys. But all those people who threaten, they're like, oh, we're going to change banks. They never do it. They never do it because it's such a lot of paperwork and it's a pain in the ass.
And it's also just all talk. I feel like, the rate at which news on social media just like comes in and out of the system, we clutching at straws as far as talking about the thing that's most popular. The same day as rand manipulation is the same day that Oscar comes out. It's the same day so we just want to be involved in every conversation, even if truly you don't give a rat's ass. Here you are, pledging to leave your bank that you've been with for 40 years. Are you sure, Mahriki? Are you sure?
Yo. It's ridiculous. Please. Exactly. No one buys it. And is there anyone who truly, except for the people who are paid to do advertising, is there anyone who truly loves their bank? I don't believe there's such a person in the world. Steve says the bank is not your friend. Yeah.
Can I tell you though, South African banks do make your life a hell of a lot easier than overseas. Like when I went overseas, it was a big eye opener how many features like our banking apps have and allow us to do things versus like, in the US, you need 2 or 3 different apps to kind of do what some of our banking stuff do. We don't even realize like how much our banking apps do.
No, we definitely do have some of the best banking systems in the world. However, that doesn't take away from the fact that a bank is a bank is a bank.
I agree, but I'm saying it does have added conveniences for us, but it's just like I don't want to go. I haven't stepped into a bank in 3 years, and I've been meaning to. And then the other day, I lost my card or whatever, and I had to go, and I couldn't do anything online or over the phone. I had to go into a bank,
like
and actually had to sit there for 40 minutes to run through a few things to just go get a new card. Like it was so irritating, but it's the reason I stay away from banks.
Tedious, but like, what are you gonna do? You're just gonna put your money in a sofa? We can't all swirl it out, my boy.
I think this is quite interesting. There's a story, we talk about the banks and who wouldn't want to steal from their bank if they could get away with it, right?
Right.
Well, there's this dude called Peter Higgs who stole like 100,000 pounds worth of artifacts from the British Museum. Now, if I were to be a thief, that would be what I would steal. He stole everything, including Roman gems and a whole lot of things that hadn't even been cataloged by the museum, and then sold them on eBay.
Oh,
wow.
Except I would have stolen this stuff and I would have kept it because you know what?
Yeah, he got caught.
What an idiot this guy is, right?
Yeah, why? Keeping it is one thing, and then passing it down to your kids or whatever, letting them deal with it. But like selling it on eBay is like you want to get caught.
Yeah,
I want people to.
Yeah. What do you?
That's sad.
What a dummy. So they say he's not cooperating with their search. Oh yeah, you think he'd cooperate? Well, I love it when like someone thinks, oh well, out of the goodness of their heart, they'll cooperate. No, they won't.
No, they've been caught, so now it's time to spill the beans. Of course, they're not going to. They're keeping it for a Netflix movie, and then they get paid.
Or damaged 2,000 objects. This guy,
Wait, how did he do this, Gareth?
Yeah,
because the museum trusted him, and when you trust somebody and they're a thief, like we've trusted our government, this is what happens to you guys. Sorry.
This kind of reminds me about the R1 million SABC piano that was stolen out the door.
Exactly.
How would you steal a R1 million grand piano in a locked up facility? Like,
right.
It happens.
So many questions. It reminds me of that Eddie Murphy movie. What's it called? Is it Something Town? Where they essentially steal a car from the top floor of
isn't it Tower Heist?
Something like that. The Tower Heist where they end up putting the car in the pool anyway.
Yeah.
Ben Stiller's in it. What's it called again? Yeah, I think it's Tower Heist. Like, how do you steal an object like that? It definitely does not go through the front door. That's for sure.
So this guy wasn't stealing big things, and he wasn't stealing like stuff that was famous and it was on display. He was stealing like stuff they didn't even know was in the catalog, because clearly he was put in a position of power. He was like made important. And then he was like, well, I'm going to help myself. And that's exactly what he did. He helped himself.
Clever.
And he just started taking stuff out of the museums uncatalogued. They probably, most museums don't show everything they have. Most of their really good stuff is probably, back in a box in the basement somewhere. And this guy's like, you don't need it, so I'll just take it and sell it on eBay. Great.
Do you think he did this all alone? Do you think he had accomplices?
I think he could have done it alone, Ryan. I don't think this is not a complicated thing to pull off, because
just sounds like a lot of things.
Maybe it's like a lot of little things over time. Maybe. He obviously didn't do it in like bulk, like one massive. It's like, I'm going to work today. I'm going to take this. Next week, I'm going to take that. After 3 years, you've got like a shitload of things.
So they say he did it over a period of, let me just see here, because they, about 5 or 6 years. So he was a senior curator at the museum. You can't trust people these days,
No.
You can't.
These days, you can't trust people.
Look at the Italian Job. I'm telling you.
What has that got to do with
the movie?
Yeah. No, how one of the thieves turned on each other. And then there was
because it was an inside job as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And most of the time.
One of the thieves just like turned on one another and stole everything that the whole crew worked together to steal. And then they had to go after him for years to try and recover it.
I mean, this is interesting also, because companies have major problems with like staff who steal from them all over the world. And I just wonder, like, if you're a stationary thief, I mean, that's always a problem, but it's a bit of a running joke, because every company in the world knows someone's going to steal your station.
Oh yeah,
right.
In fact, companies like have to rebuy stationery every year because of people like that. Whether it's a pencil, a ruler, a highlighter. I mean, stationery, lighters. There's things that you should just already know that, okay, this is going to get stolen, and it is what it is. Just charge it to the game.
I was actually told, I can't remember who told me this, but like how my dad works for the bank, so he kind of gets the branded pens.
The evil banks. Yeah.
Yeah. No, he's there. And somebody was telling me that these banks order these custom like pens, like they're like big pens with the logos on them, knowing they're going to get stolen as a marketing ploy.
Oh yeah, of course.
And I was like, that's brilliant. I never thought of it like that.
No, definitely. I mean, if you look around your house, how many branded items are there that were never really handed to you?
Yeah.
Like, or, you never received yourself as a gift or whatever, but they just happen to be there, whether it's pens, mugs, like notebooks. I've got so many notebooks, guys. I've got so many notebooks. So I'm like, where's this even from?
But it's not like you stole them, Lebang. It's not like you went in and you decided to help yourself to their stationery cupboard. A lot of the stuff is just kind of like nobody wants it, right? Like corporate stationery. And nobody's looking for that. But if you're sitting in reception and you need a pen and you say, can I borrow a pen? Or you're in a meeting with somebody and they go, oh, here's a pen. You don't think to return it. It's not a big deal. What's the most expensive thing you have stolen? Or maybe you took it, you didn't realize that you'd stolen it. And then you got there and you got home and you're like, oh shit, I got this. I brought this home. That's happened to me once or twice. I'm trying to think what the items were.
I can't think of anything off the cuff.
I didn't steal anything, but my friend came over to my house this one time, and that's when vapes were still like, on the come up. So they weren't in fashion yet. She was like one of those trying new things people. So she always did things ahead of the pack. And she was vaping, and then I was like, oh, let me try this. And then I took some, and then I had it in my hand, and I kind of just like put it in my pocket, and life went on, right? I swear to God, like the next day, she was like on my neck, like, dude, where's my vape? I can't find it. Did you steal it? I turned my house upside down. I'm like, what is she talking about? Like, I don't even know what this is. She drove all the way back to my place, and she looked for it herself. And I was like, dude, I don't even know what this thing is.
Was she cross with you?
No, she was quite upset because, again, this was vapes are cool. Everybody has one. So she was probably like one of the few people that actually had one, like in her circles. So I put my hands in my pockets and I'm like, yo, dude, I'm so sorry. I don't know what you're talking about. And then I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, you mean this whole thing? Oh, since then.
Don't even get me started on vapes.
Oh.
I'm telling you, I saw on Instagram one of my friends addicted to vaping, and I'll tell everyone, get off the vapes because I can't stand them. They have gone and bought all the different color ones. As you know, you can buy them at the garage now.
Yeah.
And they've hung them on their Christmas tree.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And I was like, guys, this is low. Like, come on.
That's so
Are you really like, so now they've just got a bunch of vapes hanging from their tree. So whenever they need one, they just go to the Christmas tree.
This vape thing is bad, hey? There's a ton of people who are seriously addicted to this stuff.
Yeah, and there's a number of documentaries you can watch on it, actually.
I was talking to somebody yesterday about how these vapes have taken over and how people they don't know what to do without them. So I'm going to stop drinking in January, and somebody said to me, well, for God's sake, don't start vaping, because that's what people do. In order to have something to do with their hands, they start vaping. That's what people
There was one
doing.
time I went to Truth about 2 or 3 years ago for a friend's birthday of mine. And at that time, they had just come up with this idea where they got Jaeger and vodka flavors in a vape, and it was free. They were trying, so basically they would convert the liquid into a vape-like form, and then you would have the vape shot. And you would kind of get drunk off this like vapor Jaeger flavor. Well, not even flavored. It was literally like a Jaeger vape shot that you just have.
Oh, that sounds
horrible. The new thing they were trying. I don't think it worked because I haven't seen it around.
It didn't. Hey, but it's also Truth.
I won't lie.
The things that happen at Truth should just stay there. Honestly.
Hey, speaking of which, didn't you go to that festival over the weekend?
Yeah, I did. I drove to the nice dusty parts of South Africa. I was in Brongospruit for the Kendrick Lamar performance. Obviously, it was like a whole. Yeah, I drove past Gareth's place. I was like, whoop whoop. Now it was very nice. It was really great. Tyler performed on the Friday with Khalid and a lot of other people. Saturday it was Kendrick Lamar and a lot of other people, and then Sunday it was Swedish House Mafia and her, and Chainsmokers. It was just a vibe. It was great. I'm actually just excited to see the culture of festivities and festivals grow and evolve in the country, because we've just got such a long way to go. And it just reminded me of like losing the Dome and all these like great venues that we had that we just don't have anymore. It reignited like a bit of a vibe. So it was a really, really top tier festival. Very cool.
All right.
Very, very
I'm
cool.
happy to hear that. You know what, Lebang? I'm happy to hear it. Did you camp?
I did not camp because it was like super close to home. I was like, there's no point. But I have some friends that did camp, and it looked really cool, and it looked really hectic, and people had a lot of fun, and there were like bonfires everywhere, and it was a hell of a jol, Gareth. It was a hell of a jol.
Question: how was Kendrick Lamar?
Oh, he was Kendrick Lamar was Kendrick Lamar. He's phenomenal. He's an artist. He is pure fire. Everything that he does.
Best track? Because I heard he played all the bangers.
He played all of them, like from A to Z. Like I couldn't even take my phone out to record anything because I was having so much fun.
Good.
I was like jumping at every single point, and it was like in my probably my top 5 festivals that I've been to. Definitely up there.
Awesome.
Great performance. Yeah, no, Kendrick was great.
Okay. Good news. Very good, Lebang.
My last rodeo for the year. I'm just gonna sit and be a parent.
Now you can be a parent and take Christmas very seriously. Okay, we're going to be joined in a moment or two by Anthony Mederer, who I love talking to because he, of course, started Blind History with me, which is probably one of our most successful and long-lived series. People are still asking about it day after day. But the other thing about Anthony is he really gets a lot of interesting things done. And one of the projects he's involved with is called Shark Safe Barrier. We'll find out about that in a second. But he's done an amazing podcast series on his own. He doesn't need me on this one. And it's called Shark Stories. Now, people are obsessed with sharks, and rightly so, because these are the most incredible killing machines in the sea. They are extremely complex and interesting life forms. And even for somebody like me who knows nothing, I find sharks were interesting to me even from an early age. And Anthony he's doing a lot of great work with these animals. And he's got friends who are probably they're the most studied and sensible and clever and thoughtful and interesting and informed people on everything to do with sharks. And he gets them on the show and he talks to them, and he himself is quite a whiz when it comes to this stuff. So I just love it. And Shark Stories, we've already done 1 season. We're doing season 2 now, which is available on CliffCentral, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. But if you haven't listened to it yet, I thought it would be a good idea to get Anthony on to just talk to us about it. How's it, Ant? How are you?
Great, and you? Good morning, everybody.
How's it? Nice. So, first of all, I mean, sharks are, in fact, anyone in the world who goes, sharks. Like if you've ever been in the sea, you've looked around you and thought, thank God there isn't a shark here. You hear these stories, that people click on these stories, they read these stories, they love stories about shark attacks. That's where the series started, right? With stories about sharks.
100%. But that I don't know if I'm the only one, but when I was young, because I always used to read about sharks and shark attacks, so dive in the pool and look around me and see if I was going to be attacked by a shark, and I live in Johannesburg, so
I know. And there's still some people who won't get into the water. That was the line, the byline of Jaws: "Don't get in the water," because even the sound of that creepy crawly underwater, that doom 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 doom.
Exactly. And then exactly the hose touches you, so that's it.
Oh my God, yeah. All right, so where did the fascination with sharks start with you?
I think when I was very young, living in close to False Bay, my guidance counselor teacher actually was a shark hunter. So that was sort of destiny, and he never really guided us in any way, but he just talked about sharks, and then when I wasn't even 10 years old yet, and he'd caught a massive great white here in False Bay. It was over 5 meters, and Yeah, and he brought it to shore, and there was a newspaper article, and I was actually in that picture.
Oh yeah! Wow.
Yeah. So he opened the jaw of the shark and showing everybody, and from that point on, I've been fascinated by them, and I think that just the immense power, and they don't want to use it on us, but it's just, they have superpowers. We watch all these Marvel movies, and the superheroes, but these animals are incredible. The great white has got, the biting power second only to the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and the bull shark has got more testosterone than any animal on Earth. So it's just, and just imagine, Gareth, a world without sharks. Look how fascinated we are with dinosaurs, and we don't want to get to a stage where it's too late. And I think a lot of people are talking and understanding. I mean, it's the ecosystem. You don't need to hug a tree to understand that now we've got so many seals because the great whites have basically left False Bay, and they are eating more fish and overbreeding. So it's all of these play a massive role in the ecosystem, and so there's a lot of things involved, and the biggest thing for me is, we live on a continent, and we live even the southern tip of Africa, and we've got apex predators, we've got lions, we've got leopards, we've got great whites, we've got bull sharks, we've got killer whales, we've got a diverse stretch of the most incredible creatures in the world. And I think it's important that we do our best to try to look after them.
So this brings us to Shark Safe Barrier, because you mentioned, and we'll talk about the relationship between sharks and humans. And what you're trying to do here is improve that relationship and make humans safe from sharks, because we are paranoid about them. We hear about shark attacks because they are rare and they don't happen all that often. But these things are never looking to eat us. We just happen to be in their environment, and we behave like idiots, and we look like seals to them. And, there are things that you and Dr. Sarah discuss, which I think are fascinating in this podcast, because I listened to the first 5 episodes. And it seems to me that you have to understand something about sharks. And if nothing else, if this series of podcasts just entertains people, that's fine. You can hear about how sharks did chomp people here, there, and everywhere. And there's some good stories, which is the whole point of telling them. But the Shark Safe Barrier, how does that work? What is it? And what is it? What's your goal here? Why would you spend hours of your life and rands that, nobody's got extra money lying around at the moment, but you're spending a lot of money on making sure that we have better ways of keeping sharks and humans separate?
Yeah, so the beauty of this particular barrier is that it can cover large distances, and there's technology coming out more and more that you can protect yourself if you're a surfer, and there's smaller, and even in technology with drones, etc., there's a certain level of protection. But what the Shark Safe Barrier does is it can protect large area. So we've just done 150 meters in the Bahamas. So it's so that type of distance. And we've looked at our east coast of South Africa and the east coast of Australia, where they've got shark nets and drum lines. This is this is something that can replace it. So effectively, it doesn't kill any animal. So the gill nets and drum lines are extremely destructive to sharks and all animals, harmless animals such as turtles and dolphins, and then all number of sharks, and 99% of the sharks are not dangerous to us. And so the barrier is effectively, the sharks don't like it, so they feel that it's got magnets in it, so it feels on the ampulla of Lorenzini on their face. They can feel everything, and it creates that current that makes them very uneasy, so they swim away from it. Or when they see it, it's this big barrier. So they don't like it and they swim away. But we in Bahamas, we've got a matinee, which is like a dugong, it's a big mammal. and it swims through our barrier, and all the fishes swim around the barrier, and it sort of develops as an artificial reef. But the shark, such as the bull shark, doesn't like to swim through it. It's been heavily tested, and there was a shark attack now in the Bahamas again, and the thing with these shark attacks is they, because of tourism, you're on this idyllic island, and there was a man and a lady maybe on a honeymoon or something, and they were paddleboarding, and the bull shark took her out, basically, and she died from injuries, and it just creates massive hype, and then people just want to kill the shark. So this is a great way of managing that, and without killing sharks or the fact that the sharks might, because they have a strong bite, kill the human.
Well, I mean, it's nice to know that someone's investing in this and doing all of this research. What did you discover during the series that you didn't know before? Because you are pretty well informed when it comes to sharks. Was there something new? Was there some interesting fact that you learned that you didn't understand before, that you didn't know about one of the stories in particular?
Yeah, so that there was one of the people that I really admired growing up was Mark Rutz, and we've got him on the show, and anybody that's interested in this type of stuff. He talks about he's a proper old sea dog, talks slowly, but he's free dived with great whites for the last 30 years, and he's been all over the Shark Week, and he was called the Shark Man. And I learned so much in terms of behavior. There's a social hierarchy. I mean, I didn't realize and understand the social hierarchy, and he fitted into that hierarchy. And I'm talking about he's diving with 26 individual great whites. And then he also talks, he talks about not wanting to get in the water with 3 meter male great whites because they're naughty teenagers that have testosterone. But he will any day get in with the 5 meter. He'll get in with a 5 meter female because his exact words on our podcast is they're sweethearts. So I mean, it's crazy just listening to some of the stories. I watched when he got out of the water once, and he sucked very hard on one of those cigarettes that he had after he But I mean, it's just. I think that the thing is that it's a behavior. We would have cats and dogs and horses and whatever we as humans have, and they've got personalities, and these. It's incredible the personalities that they have. Some of them are a little bit more feisty. Some of them are shy. Some of them are, they don't suffer fools easily. So you just got to understand who they are and make sure you can see them. So it's incredible how, and what I've learned, another thing is like a bull shark, which is so destructive. I mean, you look like a chicken after they're finished with you. But when you dive with them, like at Aliwal Shoal, when they're pulling the bait balls around, I mean, they don't like to come near the divers with the bubbles. They're very skittish, they're very nervous. So there's just so much that we have to learn about these apex predators, and I think that all of us learned so much in the first eight episodes, because some of the stories I tell, and I love telling stories. In the early 1900s, nobody really put more than their big toe in the water, and they dressed like doilies. That they had little white things on their head, and it looked like their pajamas on, and they would prance on the beach. And there was 1 or 2 individuals on a very hot, in a very hot summer that decided to stretch away from the rest of the doilies, and they got absolutely smacked, and people didn't know what it was. They said there's giant turtles around, they're eating people. So it's
monsters.
Exactly, monsters. So we've come a long way.
I want to look at some of the comments here because people are being quite funny about this. But Vyasan says, "How do you get rid of some sharks in your family?"
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the first. Maybe you can shock them, or maybe take them shark cage diving and open the gate. I'm not sure.
Tracy says they've spotted a few great whites in False Bay recently. Good to have them back after being pushed out by orcas for a while, because that's what happened, right?
Yeah. So that's really great news, Tracy. So I'm also very excited about it. I see that there was 4 separate sightings. So I mean, if this is something happening and they're starting to come back, I think it's the most incredible news. I know that the orcas are still operating around here, and what happens with that is that they're also running out of their own food. So they're changing their behavior. The great whites ran out of their fish that they hunt in summer, so they left the bay, and so the orcas played a role, but it's a lot to do with the dynamics of overfishing, etc. So it's really great news. The shark spotters can stop reporting on bronze whalers the whole time, and actually it's going to be a real fun summer.
Okay, and then this point that Arbot makes, the less than 6 human deaths a year from shark attacks. Hippos kill more than 500 people a year. Is that right?
Yeah, that's 100% right. There really is such a small amount of shark attacks. And when I was actually preparing the stories for Shark Stories, you have to really dig deep to look for interesting stories. Well, let's say there's a little bit of, they're quite gruesome, some of them, but there's just not a lot of them. I mean, it's just things that don't happen. I think, though, that what's happening with the dawn of the technology that we have, people are now filming these attacks, and that just adds to the. There was that shark that was bitten in a tiger shark bit a man, a Russian guy in the Red Sea this year.
Yes, and I mean, that was reported everywhere, and everybody was sending the video around, and that doesn't help poor sharks,
Not at all, and so he didn't even, he was swimming around sort of that area where he'd obviously killed the gentleman, and he didn't feel like he was doing anything wrong. He had to run away, so they caught and killed him. Overall, it is a sad story.
It's bad PR, and let's just call it what it is. It's bad PR. Sharks do not have a good PR agency. They need someone to represent them in the media.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. And that's what we try and do. And I think this is, Shark Stories is education, but people don't really education from school and blah blah blah. It's nice to come. What I try to do here is try to come up from a different angle. So I'm talking about Black December 1957, 9 shark attacks in a week. So most crazy stuff on Natal coast. But then afterwards, Sarah comes on and she'll explain. She starts explaining. Well, there's a trigger. So massive rain. So all the cows were shipped out, floated out at sea. There was all sorts of debris. That was one. Number 2, we had a whaling station that was going, which great whites love whales. I mean, it's like us with ice cream. And then the other thing is that the increasing amount of people, more and more people were flocking to the beaches. So it's the perfect storm. And that's why something like that happens.
What do these idiots think? That the sharks aren't going to want to eat them? You don't know how tasty you are for a shark, you idiots.
Yeah, right? And they were on their lilas and floating around in the muddy water. And there was a lot of that year there was a lot of chicken bones around. It was devastating. But these are very interesting. And I mean, so now what happens? Sarah will unpack it for us. She looks at it from a scientific perspective. And the crazy thing about this particular incident, they started bombing the Navy. They started depth charging the sea. So they thought, no, we're going to kill all the sharks. So they depth charged the sea. And what happened was...
That is just so stupid and irresponsible.
Yeah. And now suddenly you've got chum. So there were more sharks. So there were more attacks after the depth charges that there were,
Well, and we've got to wrap it up there because we have the next hour to get to. But I'm really thrilled that we've got another series. Shark Stories is available on CliffCentral.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Go and take a look. It'll be the most awesome thing that you could listen to over the holidays, and you can regale everybody with great stories at the Christmas table, and also keep them out of the water if you really don't like them. So there's lots of good stuff.
Just in the morning and the evening. I think in the day it's fun.
Yeah. All right, but thanks so much for joining us, and happy Christmas, and New Year to you and the family, and we'll catch up in the new year.
Fantastic. To all of you too. Thanks a lot.
Ciao.
Thanks,
Awesome.
I blame Deep Blue Sea. Guys, do you remember the shark movies from back in the day? They did nothing for shark PR. Deep Blue Sea, what, that one with LL Cool J. You just grew up being in fear of sharks without even knowing if it can kill you or not. You were just like,
Lebang,
shark, run.
I have the solution for you. There is an app that I downloaded not too long ago that actually tracks sharks
Get out.
on the coast.
No, really?
Yeah, and then they all have names because they've kind of tagged them. So you can click on one, and then like there's Anne Bonny, and see where they are on the coast, so you can just make sure.
It's a hard no for me. It's a hard no, but thank you.
Okay, guys, we got to take a break. When we come back, I've got to introduce an interview with someone who you think you know, but I'm telling you, you're going to be impressed with this guy's life story and some of the things we don't know about him. Kanthan Pillay, who's regularly a co-host and guest on the Burning platform. We're going to go into his life and his family background, his education. You'll find out a whole bunch more about him in the next hour. Don't go anywhere. CliffCentral.com. It is Wednesday morning. Good morning, everyone.
This week on the Auto Trader podcast.
Anyway, so this is the last episode of the year. So I thought maybe we could kick off the episode the same way we do every single year for the last 2 years now by speaking by an armored vehicle. I don't know why that keeps happening, but last year, literally the last episode we spoke about an armored vehicle.
You're kidding.
And right now, yeah, we had I think it was ArmorMax or one of our dealerships we're talking about armored vehicles. So I thought maybe we can talk about the car that we're currently what the Kanthan team is reviewing, which is the G400 Stronger Than Time, the G-Wagon. And I heard you're going to be driving it actually.
Yes, so I'm going to be taking it home today.
Yeah.
Apparently, this car weighs about 3 tons.
Yeah, but just about 3 tons.
3 tons, and the armoring of the vehicle is about 1 ton.
Yeah.
So the vehicle naturally is about 2 tons. This adds another 30% to the car's weight.
Yeah.
Catch us every Monday at 9 a.m. on YouTube and on autotrader.co.za.
And when you go into this process world, it becomes a way of life. There's no end point. You will continually be refining. You will continually be improving your processes in your actual business. A good place to start, do your shopping properly and understand what your end goal is. Shop properly, do your homework, understand what you want. What is the end game of looking at process in your organization? Is it around compliance management? Is it about automation? Is it about visibility of process? Is it around standardization? Have an end goal in mind and then go for it.
Thanks for listening to Unbundled, brought to you by Catalytic, a series that aims to demystify technology so that you can make smarter decisions for your business. Remember that you can listen to all of the episodes on the CliffCentral app or website. And for added convenience, you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen. And remember, if you're looking for help with communications tools in your business, please make sure to visit catalytic.co.za.
All right. So before we get cracking on another busy, beautiful December day, and for everybody and anybody who hasn't done the Christmas shopping, you've got T-minus, a week and a half? Yeah.
Until thanks for the reminder.
Yeah, sorry.
So nice.
Someone's got to spoil it for you. Okay, so Kanthan Pillay, well-known name. He's a wise voice and an interesting analyst when it comes to all things political, but he's so much more than that too. I mean, he's got experiences. There are things that we discussed in this interview that I didn't know about him. He is a maestro chef, among other things. He's a South African political activist, and in his youth was in trouble for his political points of view. So we look at his family background, his education, his work life overseas. He's done some fascinating things. And he returned to settle in South Africa where his heart belongs. He's a dad and so much more. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen, the first proper discussion we've had with Kanthan about Kanthan, instead of just getting him in to talk about politics and everything else. We will be back tomorrow at 6 a.m., but take a listen to this. So I'm embarrassed to admit that Kanthan Pillay has been on the show. He's been part of the Burning Platform for years now. I've known him for years. There's so many things I just do not know, which is dreadful. So I'm glad to actually have you in here and be able to tell a little bit about your story, because it's a very interesting and quite complex, just like you, story. So it's a pleasure to have you in here and focus on you for a change instead of all the issues in the world.
It's fascinating because I think for the first time I don't need to have notes and a laptop in front of me.
No, you're just going to be talking about yourself.
Just make up stuff as I go along.
Which you don't normally do. And people project their stuff onto you when you talk about things on the Burning Platform, for example. If you have an opinion about Russia or China, or it must be because you're a big Russia supporter or you're a big India or China supporter. It's bizarre. But you...
And now suddenly I'm an Israel supporter.
So yeah, of course. But you're not afraid of any of that anyway. You could care less.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So listen, tell me about the family, because your mother was a member of parliament. Is that the tricameral parliament?
No, well, she accidentally ended up in the tricameral parliament. Yes, that's right, because she used to be Director General of Department of Education. That was
under the old regime.
Under the old, so it was. Remember, at the time, it was Indian Affairs.
Yes.
And so she was heading up education at the time. And you might remember there was this corruption scandal that happened in, I think it was called the House of Delegates, was the Indian Chamber of Parliament.
Right.
And there was Rajbansi's lot. And de Klerk basically fired Rajbansi's cabinet. And then he needed, people to start running stuff. And so he put in my mother as Minister of Indian Education.
Wow.
So she got drafted into it. And then when the 1994 elections came along, he promptly put her onto the National Party slate. And so she was a National Party member of parliament.
But
it's been a source of contention in my family for years that
I didn't
vote for my mother. Yes.
Right. You didn't vote for your mother. You were basically persona non grata to the National Party.
No, actually,
you were in the struggle, for heaven's sake.
Yes, but surprisingly, I actually had a reasonably good relationship with Rolf Meyer in particular, and so de Klerk was actually quite civil in terms of dealing with me. Tony Leon far less so.
But this is in the 80s, and I mean, you were studying.
Yes.
At the University of Durban Westville.
Yes.
And you were expelled.
I was expelled there
because you were politically dangerous.
Look, I don't want to make that sound bigger than it actually is, because there were a lot of us who were expelled back then.
Yes, but student politics is where all politics starts.
Mm-hmm.
And you were a real rebel rouser. I mean, you wrote stuff, you said stuff, not unlike what you do now.
No, very much so. And the interesting thing is, if I look back at stuff that I've written back then, so my first byline was in 1980, after I got kicked out of university. I became a freelance journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my views have actually not changed during the course of time. Well, apart from economics.
But you also, I mean, there's a lot of music in the family too. Your father was a classical Indian vocalist, right? And you've got pop stars in the family.
I do indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Creason.
Creason is my first cousin. Yes, indeed. Yes.
I saw him at your birthday a while ago, and I didn't know there was a connection then. I went, but obviously there's a connection here. Yeah. So, I mean, it's also another interesting thing about you that I got in my notes, these copious notes that the producers give me. You were at high school in Bangalore.
Yes. So again, that was because of student activism. So back in 1974, you might remember, well, there was a sequence of events that affected the subcontinent.
Kanthan, I wasn't here in 1974.
Well, essentially in 1974, there was the coup in Portugal.
Right.
And a result of the coup in Portugal, suddenly you had Mozambique declaring independence, you had Angola declaring independence, and of course there was Frelimo at the time.
Yeah.
That was fighting, and there was a Frelimo rally that was organized in Durban. That was at Curry's Fountain, which was the playground for my school. I was at Gandhi Desai. And of course, we got swept up in that. And my mother at the time said to me, well, if you stay here, you're going to keep getting caught up in all of this rubbish. And why don't I send you to boarding school in India?
Which is such an interesting point of view to take, because most parents would be, just behave, stop causing trouble.
Yes.
And even though your mother was in government, so to speak.
No, she wasn't at the time.
She wasn't at the time.
No, at the
and
time.
she didn't have political ambitions at that point.
She never had any political ambitions, actually.
But still irritated as a mother that her son should be causing trouble, or proud of you. Which was it?
I think it was more a question of her getting scared that I might get sucked into the destructive maw of losing perspective.
Well, you can joke about it, but
Yes.
there were actual dangers involved then. I
Yes.
mean, we've got to remember there were states of emergency.
Look, understand, I was 12 going on 13 at the time. So.
Jeez, that's a hell of a time to be politically conscientized.
Yeah.
I don't think I was politically aware at 12, 13.
Well, you have to understand that I had, in my family, I had lots of people who were actually, politically active. So, one of my cousins and her husband needed to go into exile on an exit permit at the time. Another one of my cousins was actually arrested at the Frelimo rally. And of course, that's where the likes of Sats Cooper, Streli Moodley, Terra Lakota, all of them went to Robben Island precisely for being at that rally.
Sure.
So they were the youngest crop of people to go across there. And I think from my mother's perspective, there was the sense of, yes, there's, real potential danger of, kids getting, well, firstly beaten up by the cops, so that was the first thing that one wanted to
because
avoid.
the cops were violent. I mean, South Africa's got a history of the cops being violent. But does it irritate you? Because I know you now, and people assume all kinds of things about your politics now, because you're a capitalist, because you're more conservative than you are liberal in very many instances. I mean, you're still socially very liberal, I think it's fair to say. But
well,
people,
in the classically liberal sense,
yeah,
yes.
but people, if you ask them about Kanthan's politics and they know even a little bit about you, they go, oh, well, he must be an arch conservative. And then you've got this history and this background, and it's exhausting actually to keep explaining this to people. And you don't have to run around with your credentials.
No, but I think that people have this desire to put you into a particular box without, just simply based on the fact that you offer an opinion on something very specific. Now, if I look in terms of my personal belief system, I've got a lot of classically liberal values. So, I'm a freedom of speech absolutist, for example. I don't believe that there should be such a category as hate speech. But you can say things that are pretty much hateful. And if you call for someone to be killed, well, that's incitement. There's a separate charge around that. I'm very much against the death penalty. I'm very much in favor of gay rights.
Yeah.
All of that type of stuff. But
what has changed since you were a teenager and a guy in his 20s who was very politically aware, outspoken, and all the rest of it? Nothing's changed in terms of the outspokenness, but your position on things?
I guess the economic perspective is the single thing that basically
I saw such
changed.
a funny tweet the other day, or it was a post on Instagram of a tweet. Someone said, I watched this girl getting her first paycheck, and you could almost see the socialism ebbing out of her veins.
Uh-huh.
Is that what happened?
Well, no, it wasn't really that. It was at the point at which I realized that we can have all of these, relatively cool ideas about, we're all equal and we all have the same rights. But damn it, we're not all as competent as each other.
Uh-huh.
And that becomes the fundamental point of differentiation, because you can all be lumped into the same group and you ostensibly have the same background and you treated pretty much as equals. But at the end of the day, you don't actually have the same capacity to do stuff.
Well,
And,
socialism thinks we're all the same, and if we're not, then we just need to change the system, because then we can make the outcomes the same.
Very much so. But the point at which you ask any parent, do you want to be treated by a doctor of your race, or do you want to be treated by the best possible doctor?
Yeah, they'll choose the
and
best
suddenly
possible doctor.
they're
Doesn't matter how political they are.
Absolutely.
Best doctor. But interesting that you found your way to Princeton, again, because you were kind of trying to get out of the country. It was
that's a fascinating story, and it's
yeah.
entirely.
I mean, first of all, it's interesting you're at Princeton, and even though you've mentioned it to me before, when I found out what you were doing there, and what you studied there, and what you guys managed to do in terms of advancing computer technology, the exact thing that you did, and it was fluid dynamics, computational
CFD,
fluid dynamics.
Yes.
I mean, we'll get to that in a second. So tell me about how you ended up at Princeton.
Well, so of course I was a university dropout out here. Well, expelled from Durban, Westville, and
not a dropout. You expelled. It's
all right,
different to a dropout.
Okay, sure. All right. Okay. Expelled.
I was a dropout.
Yeah. So expelled from Durban, Westville, and in early '85. You had USALEP, the United States South Africa Leadership Exchange Program, and they set up something with Boston University to essentially provide a very intensive training program for South African journalists who'd never had any formal training. Okay. So there was an entire group of us who ended up at Wits Business School for that period with these professors from Boston University who were teaching us for that 6-week program. And so we went through that 6-week program. And at the end of that 6-week program, the professor was heading up the program. His name was Henk Lebrie. It was actually Henry Grattan Lebrie, but, Americans, affectations, called himself Henk. But he calls me into his office. And he says, look, I've had you here for 6 weeks. And I've taught you absolutely nothing because you know all this stuff already. And I just kind of shrugged and I said, well, okay. I still had fun. It was good. I enjoyed it. And he pushes a pile of papers across to me, and I say, what's this? He says, I want you to fill these out. These are endorsements for scholarships in the U.S.
Wow.
And
that's amazing.
And I said, well, what the hell? And I went through the process of filling out the paperwork. And then come 1986 with the state of emergency, and there were cops knocking on my door at 3 a.m. Fortunately, I was not at home at the time. I was staying illegally at William Saunderson Mayer's home, living in his basement. So, security branch was knocking at my door looking for me. And guess what? I end up with acceptances to about 5 universities in the U.S.
But you didn't leave because you wanted to go to the U.S. I mean, that may have been part of it, but you also had to get out.
Well, I had to get out, and this was a godsend because, it suddenly pitched up, from nowhere.
And scholarships too, so you didn't have to worry that your parents would have to pay for this because it might have been very difficult.
It wasn't a question of my parents because, I was basically employed and paying my own way from the time I was 19
But you wouldn't have
years
been
old.
able to afford it necessarily.
No, absolutely not.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me what computational fluid dynamics are.
Well, it basically is, it deals with flow, so just about everything that involves, an object moving through the atmosphere or moving through water, it's flow.
So it's not liquid drives or any of that stuff. It's actually about fluids. It's it's a physics.
Well, yes, So basically, an aircraft wing involves fluid dynamics, and so very specifically, the design in terms of aircraft wings requires a fair amount of computation because you do a combination in terms of how long the wings need to be, how wide they need to be, how much the flaps should be. There's a lot of computation that goes into that. And the particular computation that we used to do at the time, we used to run on these silicon graphics machines, which were the fastest machines that we had at the time. You might remember Jurassic Park. The animations that were done for that were done on silicon graphics machines, and we were using pretty much those same machines at Princeton. And then Intel pitched up, and they had this processor, which was the i860 processor, which at the time,
Intel Hypercube.
Yes, well, at the time, in terms of floating point operations, was roughly half the speed of a Cray YMP, which was the fastest supercomputer at the time.
When is this?
1989, 1990, around about that time frame.
Okay.
And so they pitched up, and they essentially gave us this box, and they had 32 of these chips in a particular box, and they said, look, we've designed this thing, and we don't know what to do with it. So, what can you guys do with it? So the particular runs that we used to do at the time, and a lot of the work that we were doing there, this was the program in applied and computational math at Princeton. A lot of the work we were doing was for the U.S. Department of Defense.
Yeah.
Because, it was they'd come to us and they'd say, we'd want you to run this computation because it's a submarine fin.
Right.
And then we'd take a look at it and we'd say, no, this is actually an aircraft design, but that's okay. We get it. We'd run the computation, but it would take like 2 weeks for the entire sequence to run because it was very intensive and, you had to keep crunching the numbers.
And the computing power then was not as compact or
nowhere near as
incredible as what we use now. I mean, computers were very rudimentary things, and I mean, people like Ray Kurzweil at MIT were using things that took up a whole floor.
Yeah, very much so. I mean,
in the 80s, that was like the big.
Well, to run the IBM 3081 mainframe, which was the biggest thing that we had on campus at the time, it was bigger than this house, the floor that we used to run it on. But so they pitched up. So what we figured out was that we could kind of compartmentalize the way in which we were doing the calculation. So if you think of an aircraft wing as an example, and essentially what you're trying to do is to calculate the flow over segments of the wing at a time. And so we then partitioned the wing into separate segments and ran each of those computations on individual processes and then lump them together.
Do you have like a wind tunnel that you would test these things out on?
No. It's all entirely theoretical.
All theoretical.
Yeah. So because they're all known quantities. So
you wouldn't build the thing necessarily, but you do the science for them, and then they would build
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
you weren't involved in the manufacture or the actual practical testing or any of that stuff.
No. It's fun in theory.
But you'd say this angle would produce this amount of lift.
Yes.
This is where the airflow would go.
Well, it's lift, it's turbulence, it's
sure.
All sorts of efficiency, the amount of power.
And when people think of aerodynamics, they don't think of fluid because we immediately assume, well, it's a gas. But at those speeds and temperatures, very often gases behave exactly like liquids, and in fact, the effect that's produced is precisely the same.
Sure. And so essentially, what we were able to do using the hypercube is that we were able to slash the computation time from 2 weeks down to 2 days.
Wow.
Which meant that we then ended up beating out the rest of the country for getting, at the time, a U.S. Department of Defense grant for $14 million, which was a fair whack of money at the time.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so Professor Stephen Orzak, who was head of our department at the time, was pretty smug about it. He's dead now, lovely guy.
Well, what's happened to tertiary education in the US since you left?
Oh, geez. Look, I think
it's become a disaster.
The thing is,
I don't think they teach anything like computational fluid dynamics anymore. They just teach you gender studies and other grievance studies.
Look,
not so much at Princeton.
Yeah, I think that you'll find that one of the major issues right now is that a lot of the actual computational power is no longer at the universities themselves. So
sure.
At Princeton at the time, we had the John von Neumann Supercomputer Center. At the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, which actually had a Cray YMP, and
wow.
you had to submit applications in order to get your code to run out there, and so forth. So our friend from Beautiful Mind.
Yes, there was an actual person.
Yes.
The movie was based. Russell Crowe played the character.
Yes,
It's this mathematical genius.
Nash. Yeah. So he was
Nash. That's his name. And he was a real guy.
He was a real guy. He used to come to the Princeton Computer Center, and he used to give me his code to run on punch cards.
Really?
And I used to tell him, we actually have interactive terminals where you can run it. No, he didn't want anything because he said correctly. Because they're actually inefficient. They're taking up computing resources, and everything I've got here is on my punch cards. And so I'd say, sure, I'll go load it up for it.
So when the movie came out, you must have been quite thrilled. You said to people, I worked with this guy.
I only found out about the movie coming out because Ed Milches, who worked with me at the computer center, then sent me frantic messages on Facebook to say, hey, look, our old friend now has a movie made about him.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What a story, huh?
Loads of fun, yeah.
And the research and the work that you did there then got you a job in, of all places, Sardinia.
Well, there was a visiting Italian scientist who was seconded to PACM at the time, and he saw the stuff that I was doing, and
it's okay. Why you not come to Sardinia? That's what he said.
Well,
it's an exact quote. I've got it here.
Pretty much something like that. Look, I had a choice at the time because I got job offers from Wall Street because. I think Salomon Brothers offered me a $40,000 signing bonus at the time.
Wow, that would have been a good.
To go and
so, as an arch capitalist, which I know you are,
no, but
how could you turn that down?
I wasn't. Look, I mean, it was a toss-up between
science. What's wrong with you?
No, go and work Wall Street, or go to a Mediterranean island that I know absolutely nothing about. But
you could have. For all we know, you could have come back to South Africa and bought 3/4 of the country if you'd gone to Wall Street then.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I'd probably end up like David Sachs and never coming back.
That's also true. And you did, when you eventually came back, and I don't mean to skirt past Sardinia, because I'm sure you had a lovely time there, and I'm sure it wasn't boring, and I'm sure that you learned plenty, and you also met fascinating people. But to skip ahead, you did come back to South Africa, and you decided straight away, I'm staying.
Yes.
I mean, things had changed considerably since when you left.
Yes. Well, I came back December 93, and
then things were really kicking off.
Yeah, and so I just went back and said, guys, I'm going to be out of here. Here's my 3 months notice. And
all right, so talk to me about your perception of South Africa in 93 and why you wanted to come back and what you saw happening, because it was, I mean, that whole period from 1990 until probably 95, 6 was the most exciting period in South Africa in terms of everything changing. The economy, obviously the politics, society itself was changing a lot. There were so many amazing moving parts all at once. It would have been very hard for anyone, especially if they were South African, like you, to say, no, I'd rather be somewhere else.
So a couple of things happened on that particular trip that, were kind of juxtaposed with each other. The one is that the RVB were having a march from the Voortrekker Monument.
So you joined them immediately. Well, that's what people say. That right-winger, you must have.
I don't think I would have passed the physical back then either.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But so...
They were planning a march from the Voortrekker Monument.
Yes.
To where?
Somewhere in Pretoria. But I happened to...
They were notoriously bad at marches and coups.
Yeah, so I happened to be in Pretoria at on that particular day because my then wife, as in mother of my eldest daughter,
Yes.
was studying at UNISA at the time. And so we figured we'd just pitch up there and actually submit the applications in person. And then as we were driving past, Eophius, and we see the RV beer guys.
How many of them were there at that point?
Well, that wasn't the issue as much as the fact that they were all decked out. They had Osava, literally, and they were in ox wagons and marching along, and then they would, and then there was the Kapi Commando people, I mean,
the old ladies with Kapis,
yeah, with their bonnets, and like it was a throwback to the previous century. And then I pitch up at UNISA, and there are hundreds upon hundreds of people in this queue, but the overwhelming majority of the people there are young black people. And guess what? UNISA had actually anticipated that there was going to be this type of queue, and they'd actually laid out enough chairs to accommodate everyone. So there was a line sneaking all the way outside to the admissions place.
Imagine how angry the RV beer would have been.
And it was just incredibly quick and efficient.
RV beer would have been so cross, though, if they'd seen
So on the one hand, you've got 100 years in the past, and then the future of the country. And I was saying, no, I got to be part of this. And it was really that simple. I said, I'm not going to miss this.
Yeah,
I need to be back.
It must have been fantastically exciting. And South Africa was a burgeoning place at that point. And the focus of the world was on us, right? So, okay, you get back to South Africa, but now you're a scientist, actually, at this point. And what kind of career prospects did you have? Because media wasn't on the cards for you at that point.
Well, actually, I went right back to media, but I went back to them.
Because you were writing, sorry, let's just fill in. You were writing as a student, and even before then. And you actually gave lectures at Princeton in South African history.
Yes.
So that's no small feat for anyone at that period of their life to be lecturing other students at Princeton about.
It was useful because of the fact that the crop of academics that, remember, we're talking, close to 40 years ago now.
Yeah.
They were an entirely different batch. And it was such an exciting place to be. Free speech was absolutely the norm in that place. And the discussions would be absolutely robust. But it really was the type of thing where they would say, look, hey, we've got a guy right here who's got first-hand experience on the ground. And we're going to pull him in, and we're going to actually have conversations and get the students to engage with the...
Okay, but let's just stop with free speech for a second, because it's something that I often get into arguments or discussions with friends and enemies of mine about. You said you're a free speech absolutist, which is a position that many have said is an untenable one. There's always going to be a limit to everything. Something without limits isn't worth anything. Why do you say you're an absolutist?
Well,
because it's a position I've occupied before, and I've kind of ameliorated that somewhat.
So the first thing is that I'm very clear that words are not violence.
I agree with you.
Okay, violence is violence.
Yes.
Right.
Agreed.
Hurt feelings are never going to be the same as actually getting a snot clap.
Yes.
Okay, I don't care who you are.
Yes.
And having been on the receiving end of snot claps myself, and lots of verbal abuse, I can tell you that yes, there's a definite difference between the two. In the cases where speech might potentially be dangerous, okay, so clearly if you're with a crowd of people and you say that person is an impimpi, go and kill him. That's not a free speech issue. Okay.
No.
Yeah, that's actually incitement to violence. It's an entirely different category.
But there's already a category for that. We don't need to create a hate speech category.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So people bring up the old chestnut about, shouting fire in a crowded theater. You've heard that one many times.
Yeah.
And again, that's reckless endangerment. There's a separate category for that. You don't need to actually police it. At the point at which you tell lies about someone,
there's defamation.
There's defamation.
Yeah.
So where is the point at which you need to actually be curtailing speech other than to protect someone's feelings?
But Kanthan, people's feelings are very important. We've been led to believe over the last 10 years they are the most important thing, and how someone feels about the world is their truth.
Sure. And, this comes back to religion, doesn't it? Because it is, fundamentally that. All religions are variations on my imaginary friend is bigger than yours. And the point at which you have someone like me who's atheist, I'm very respectful of people's spaces, but I'm certainly going to speak up to my beliefs when I want to, and people's feelings are going to be hurt as a result of that. And I think that makes for a good society.
Have you ever heard a good argument against free speech?
No, I haven't.
And
because in every case, I will always turn around and say, actually, there's a different way of dealing with this.
And have you ever heard from anyone who you thought was infringing on your free speech? And have you ever had situations in your adult life where you had that freedom of speech curtailed, either within the law or by agents who actively want to change the law?
See, the interesting thing, we just go back to the apartheid era for a while. And the Nats used to say back then that there was absolute freedom of speech in South Africa. And to a large extent, they were correct. The problem was, under the National Party, is that there was freedom of opinion, but there was not freedom of facts.
Right.
So you were not allowed to spread truthful information if that truthful information was censored. Okay, so for example...
They didn't like it.
Yeah, so you couldn't write anything in terms of the Police Act. You couldn't write anything about police unless you got the police to comment on it and gave them equal space. That was written into the...
right of reply. It's more of a journalist thing than it is
it wasn't exactly a right of reply. It was, but it had a chilling effect on. So even if I saw a policeman shooting a kid in the back, I still had to go through a process of getting a quote from the police, which frequently would say, "No, it didn't happen."
Yeah,
in the case
in those days.
Yeah, in the case of the Department of Defense. You were not allowed to write anything about the Department of Defense unless they said that it actually happened.
It was a security risk.
It was a security risk, absolutely. So you were not allowed to quote anything from any prisoner. So I grew up my entire life. I had no idea what Nelson Mandela looked like because it was illegal to have pictures of Nelson Mandela.
None of us did. And you couldn't Google him.
Yes. So, and the only point at which we suddenly became aware of what Nelson Mandela looked like was during the state of emergency, the Bureau for Information put out a publication which had a list of dangerous people, and it had a picture of Nelson Mandela in it. And in terms of the emergency laws, anything that the Bureau for Information put out, you were able to publish. And suddenly, all of us in the country saw what Nelson Mandela looked like for the first time.
Yeah.
Ever,
I remember the fascination even when people were, including me, in 1990, watching him being released from Victor Verster. No, it was from Victor Verster.
It was Victor Verster, yes.
And the cameras were jostling to get that first shot of, and this stately gray-haired man walked out of there, and I thought, wow, that's the most famous man in the world.
Yes.
And so, no one had seen him in person with the exception of his guards.
I was watching that from my apartment at Princeton, and we had a whole bunch of South Africans that were there, and we were all glued to the TV. Fascinating stuff.
Okay, so before we get into the media stuff, on this freedom of speech thing, because you're an atheist, there tends to be, and I'm not being unfair to atheists, being one myself, but there tends to be this God-shaped hole in many atheists. And they fill it with things like free speech or secular humanism, whatever that is. Or they fill it with, the idea of many of them have replaced the hole that religion supposedly leaves for some with politics. We see it in the world today. There's lots of leftism, which is actually just a craving in adolescent souls for values, purpose, meaning, something greater than yourself. And sometimes, whether it's wokeness or whether it's campaigning for Ukraine or whatever it might be, the people who put flags on their profile pictures in order to feel part of something. You don't feel that perhaps things like free speech have taken an almost sacred place in your worldview?
Well, I don't think so. I think it's not something that I think about on a daily basis. So it's stuff that you kind of believe in. But I suppose it's the difference between someone who's, let's say, born to Catholicism and so they go to church, but they actually don't think about the church, as opposed to someone who's converted and they suddenly become quite obsessed with it. So I think free speech and liberal values are just it's something that's ingrained.
And where do you think that came from with you?
I think
your parents?
Well, a lot of it came from the fact that I read a lot as a kid, and so there were a lot of books that I read that taught things like self-reliance and
terrible stuff like that, like accountability.
Accountability, the importance of good character, honesty, all of that kind of stuff. And
all that boring stuff that makes the world work.
Yes.
So what's happened with society where those things have become distasteful to so many? Everybody is desperate to be at the top of the victim hierarchy. People are desperate to not be responsible for their own decisions. Everything else must be blamed for all the ills in your life, and you must never take credit for any of the successes because that's pure luck.
I think a lot of it
is generational.
I don't think it's as much generational as much as the fact that we've increasingly relied upon the state to take responsibility for things that when I was a kid, we were told were things that you did as an individual. So the idea that the state needed to provide for you was never something that ever entered my landscape at all.
Well, the state, when you were growing up, especially did not care about people of color.
Sure,
which you would have fallen into the category of, right?
Look, to a large, it never was about that either. Look, sure
no,
enough.
But it becomes a talking point today, and I know you don't make a big thing about it, but in those days,
yes,
there wasn't the scope of possibility that there is now.
That's correct. But at the same time, the fact that you didn't have anything to rely on meant that your options were pretty much infinite, because that meant that you had to pretty much build whatever you wanted to by yourself.
Don't spoil this. I'm building a victim narrative for you, and you're chopping it apart here. Stop it. Why are you being so anti-left?
Well, it's because you're white and you can't possibly understand my pain.
Well, exactly. Your lived experience, right?
Uh-huh.
I find this country is a fascinating place. So many of the things that are good in the world can claim to have some sort of origin here, including our very species, right? But so many of the worst things, like if I think back to Roads Must Fall and that whole movement and how it's turned into essentially Black Lives Matter and this whole anti-colonial decolonizing project all over the world. South Africa has some things to answer for, as much as we have a contribution that we've made. And our contribution goes beyond Mandela and peaceful transition and all of that stuff. What do you think of, and what do people ask you about when you talk to them about being South African?
It's been a while since I've had that particular conversation.
Because people don't care anymore.
Yeah. So,
right?
There was a period during the 90s, and, I wrote about it at the time. About
it was so cool to be us.
It was so cool, and I said at the time, so when Mandela was stepping down in 99, and I took my newspaper column and I wrote an open letter to him. And the open letter was basically describing how cool it was to travel the world as a South African, carrying your South African passport as a badge of honor.
Because it says in there, in the name of the president, and we happen to have had the world's most famous and probably the most morally...
certainly in terms of leaders of the last century, yeah, very much so.
Yeah, and I would say that also we had the ability to be friends with everybody. But we were friends with people who were actually enemies with each other, and we could be friendly with both.
The thing that fell apart was when we stopped being the Rainbow Nation and we suddenly started introducing apartheid in the form of black economic empowerment, and that suddenly started dividing the nation right down. Because remember, up until the time that happened, I mean, we were a winning nation. You know,
you're going straight for the controversies here.
Yeah,
you're not even giving me room to like just garden around the edges in this story. But okay, is that where we? So BEE is one of the places we went.
No, it is the place.
It's
where
the
we went
place
wrong because the point of then dividing us as a nation,
race-based policy,
race-based policies. Because up until that time, we were South Africans first and foremost. And now suddenly there was this reintroduction of a pecking order, which has gotten progressively worse.
It has.
And
absolutely.
And there is nothing in that narrative that actually gives us any incentive for pulling together. And you can't actually build a nation unless you at least singing from the same hymn sheet on what it means to be a citizen of that particular country. So this is the problem that the United States has right now. The country has completely lost its way. So, you know, it used to be that it was truth, justice, and the American way, and everyone aspired to those particular things. Now, there's no longer that concept of truth and justice.
Okay, but then to bring it back to you, because I think you and I will have a tendency to talk about things like that because they interest us more than the personal. But I do want, if nothing else in this interview, to at least attempt for us to have a discussion about your personality, the things you care about, family, all of those things. Is it important for you, and do you consider your identity as an Indian South African to be relevant to discussions about being South African or about your place in the world or anything else?
Look, it's not a defining point in the sense of something that I actually think about. So they're very definite.
It just is.
So yeah, it just is. So there's some things that, you know, that are cultural, that are kind of innate to me that, you know, I've basically grown up with. And to a large extent, they do end up...
Like your cooking, I can attest to.
Yes,
I can.
Yeah, and that's something that runs through my family.
And you take cooking very, very seriously.
Yes, and the reason why I take it so seriously is because, you know, I spent a lot of my life poor, but I always had a fondness for good things, and I said, well, you know, one of the best ways I can get those things is to learn how to make them for myself, so that I don't need to pitch up at very expensive restaurants. But you know, so things that Indian South Africans do. One is that we prize education.
Yep.
More than just about anything else.
Yeah.
So that's very much a defining point. And, you know, I often tell my fellow South Africans, if you spend more money on funerals than you do on school fees, you know, maybe you need to be shifting that cultural perspective, because I'm very clear that that is a plus in terms of what my culture actually believes in. That,
and the other thing that I think is distinctive about you as an individual is that because you're irreligious and people always assume Indian South Africans have to be Hindu or Muslim, that kind of breaks the mold as well.
Yes, except...
You get a bit of a thrill out of breaking the mold.
Except, you know, again, this is something that I tell people.
Do you enjoy breaking the mold?
But it's not really breaking the mold, because Hinduism allows you to be an atheist.
Okay, yeah.
It's ingrained. It's ingrained in the belief system, and the belief system is that, you know, you can. There are basically 3 paths to self-actualization, and you know, the first is service to your fellow human beings. The second is service to God, and then the third is actually, you know, going and meditating up in the Himalayas and
more
and that kind of stuff. But there is nothing in terms of Hinduism that says that you need to believe in any particular deity or worship any particular deity. I mean, that's something that's there, but it's not a requirement. And also, there's nothing prescriptive about it. So there's nothing in Hinduism that says, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, all of that stuff. It does say that there are consequences. So if you kill, the consequences are that it's actually going to affect you.
Were you raised Hindu?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And look, I still take part in all of the festivals.
Sure.
I sing along.
I do
with the songs.
Christmas,
but at the same time, I went to an Islamic kindergarten when I was a kid. And so we would all line up in the morning and we would recite the Declaration of Faith. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and so forth. And then I went to a Catholic primary school and Anglican high school.
This is why I ask if you like breaking the mold, because all of these experiences, while some of them you didn't choose, they were chosen for you, I think it gives you a richness of experience which, if you are the stereotype, and there are a lot of South Africans who fall into stereotypes, I sometimes think about the way I say things or do things, and I go, that's the kind of thing a comedian would make fun of, because it's so South African. But with your international experience, the way you were raised, these different schools that you went to, that creates a much fuller person by the time you get to 25 than if you just do the same thing, you're only in the same neighborhood, you go to the school that people would expect you to go to, you're around the people who people would expect you to be influenced by.
Sure.
Are your children being raised that way?
I try as much as possible, to expose them to a wide variety of stuff. And look, that has its pros and it has its cons as well, because it can actually end up being a pretty lonely place, because people want to fit you into particular boxes wherever you happen to be, and even though you can actually have fun, hanging out and discussing, particular things within a very narrow cultural context, if it doesn't actually define you, if it's not your be-all and end-all, it can actually be quite kind of frustrating. And, hence my saying it becomes a bit of a lonely space. When people start talking about, issues of the world from a relatively narrow perspective, and you actually got this very broad sense of everything that's happening around. And do you really want to spend like the next 5 years trying to explain to them, well, actually, the stuff that you believe in is not necessarily the way you think it should be working. More often than not, it's a lot easier to just, kind of smile and keep quiet.
A bigger frame of reference, maybe.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing that I'm kind of obsessed with at the moment that I think you might have some wisdom to share on is the idea of being a generalist or a specialist. And I think both have tremendous value. We need a specialist when it comes to, mechanical engineering, for example. You don't want some guy who's just making it up as he goes. But generalists are tremendously valuable in society these days, people who know a little bit about many things. Would you categorize yourself as the former or the latter? And what do you see in the difference and the value of the two?
I think that, one can be a generalist, but whenever I have something that piques my interest, I try to end up being a bit of a specialist in it. So we've had similar discussions around things like, well, at the point at which suddenly solar energy becomes a thing, I go out and I study this stuff to a great extent because, I want to find out, how does this stuff work? What are the technologies that are actually involved? What's the cost-benefit analysis that one applies to this kind of stuff? And so, yes, it is a very broad perspective, but one needs to be able to speak with authority.
Yeah.
On, so you can't just, be sitting back and saying, I know how to make a plane take off. You also need to know how to land it. But
yeah, you'd hope so.
Yeah, but I do want. So on my very first car, I rebuilt the engine myself, mainly because I couldn't afford to pay someone else to do it. It was a Peugeot 504, and the essentially the sleeve seals had worn out, and so it was leaking water into the cylinders, and so I had an uncle who was a mechanic who.
But you see,
basically allowed me to use.
This is why I ask you the question. It's not by mistake. I know this about you, that you'll learn to take the engine apart.
Yes.
Where most people will just call the mechanic.
Right.
and you've run an election campaign because you found out what you think we need to do to fix this country. You've even written a book about it.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I know you've done the research. You've looked
Yes.
at all the systems, and you've decided this is the best, and I'll explain to you why. And it's all very practical. You're not trying to start a new ideology. You're a very practical guy.
Yes.
This comes from stripping engines and learning how to do computational fluid dynamics.
Very much so. So I think that a lot of people try to, they get a bit derisive about stuff. They say, jack of all trades and master of none.
I hate that saying.
And,
do you hate it as well?
Well, it's actually, I think to a large extent, people do that to make up for their particular shortcomings. Because, a lot of people are very specialized in terms of what they know. And
also, our education system, and you spoke about the importance of education to Indian South African families, but everybody in South Africa thinks the best thing you can do is become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, which are very specialized things.
Yes.
I mean, if you've got a heart surgeon, you want them to be a specialist heart surgeon. You don't want them to be someone who also does carpentry and a little bit of haberdashery over the weekends.
So the guy who was my GP at Princeton all those years ago, his name was John Seed. He's a doctor, and
yes.
And so at kind of the end of my second year, John Seed took 2 years off, went back to college and got an engineering degree. And at the time, he was in his 50s. And it was just something that he wanted to do because he wanted to learn more about very specific stuff. And I think that that's the type of mentality that those of us who commit ourselves to never saying, all right, I'm not learning anything from now on. I've learned everything there is to learn. And, people who work in very particular careers, they end up being in that space where, if you're an ophthalmic surgeon, for example, I guess the stuff that you will learn is when new pieces of equipment come along, but, there's only so much you can learn.
Yeah, I mark, and I don't know if you'd agree with this definition, I mark intelligence not by how much people know, but by how much they want to know. And the moment you decide, no, I know enough now, and I can't imagine a person doing that, then I think you are so full of hubris, you're just ready for the fall.
Yeah, see, one of the useful things for me is that I've ended up swapping careers so often. And
jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah, but you see, the useful thing about that is that you end up going into something where you literally know nothing about it.
Yes.
But everyone understands the basics of how a business works. So, we speak about spaza
You say
shops.
everyone does, but I don't think so.
Well, we speak about spaza shops often. And again, people, speak about spaza shops with derision. But the fact of the matter is that a spaza shop encapsulates the essence of what's needed to run a business. And more often than not, if you take a look at spaza shops, more often than not, they get run by immigrants.
Yeah.
Because they have no safety net and they're starting up from scratch. And there's essentially two things that are happening. There's the guy behind the counter, and then it's normally his wife who's at the door. And, so you've got the person who's managing the finances and the other person who's managing the inventory.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you're selling your inventory at a higher price than you got it for, you have a business. And you can apply that spaza shop model to every single business. And at the point at which you end up spending money in any business, if the money that you're spending is not going to be increasing the profitability, then you shouldn't be spending the money. So if you apply that mindset, no matter what business you go into, you'll be able to make it work if you can understand the basics of what actually drives that. So the useful thing for me is that I'd go into a business where I know absolutely nothing about it. So the time that we started ETV, I knew nothing about television. But there was a huge advantage that I had, that I knew nothing about television. And that meant that every time someone told me this is the way in which we do things, I would say, why? And then they'd say, well, because that's the way that we've always done it. And then I'd say, but what about if you do it this way? And
usually they'd shout and scream and kick and wail, but they'd go, oh, well,
yeah,
maybe. And sometimes it would work out better your way.
Well, more often than not, it did. So, I ended up with a situation with ETV News at the time. So there'd be people at that who'd be working in the news department, and I'd say, I want something done in this particular way. And the person who'd be sitting behind the desk say, no, that can't be done. And so I would say, get up from the chair, and I would sit down at the chair and do it. And then I turn around and say, now, why do I need you? Which didn't bring me many friends at the time.
I mean, there are a lot of people in media who really don't like me and who don't like you. But as Julius Malema once said to me, but there are more who like you and there are more who like me. You've done in media, print media?
Yes.
IOL, you were in charge there for a little bit.
I wasn't in charge of IOL. So
what was your exact designation? You were head of corporate affairs.
No, that is.
Sorry. Managing editor of the Cape Times.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was during the
and new enterprises manager at independent newspapers.
Yes, so that was so I spearheaded independent newspapers going into radio. So I was part of the startup team of Kaya FM.
Yeah,
so I was on the first
and YFM
on the first board of Kaya FM. Well, I went to YFM after the fact, so I went and rescued YFM at the point at which it was tanking financially. But
right.
So we also launched soccer magazines from point of view of independent newspapers back then. So Amakosi, the Brazilians, the Mighty Birds, those titles all kind of fell under me. We had the Star and SA Times International, which was essentially a free sheet for South Africans in London that we used to produce.
Wow.
So that was when I was Jean-Jacques Cornish's boss, because he was editor of that back then. So fairly substantial background in print. I drew up the first business plan for the Daily Sun. So it was Dion Duplessis' brainchild. He was my boss at the time, and I drew up the business plan, and we went and presented it to the independent newspapers board, and they said, nah, it'll never work. Crazy idea.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so that was the point at which I then went back into journalism, became managing editor of the Cape Times, and then I hopped across to ETV, at which point Dion then gave me a call. He said, but I've got the money, let's go do this thing. And I said, Dion, I can't, because I've signed up with ETV. And of course, the Daily Sun became the biggest newspaper success story ever.
Absolutely. Any regrets?
No. I mean, I regret the fact that Dion's not with us anymore. I was deeply fond of the guy. What a phenomenal talent.
Yeah, there's a lot of untold stuff in the media story of South Africa. And you told me about IOL and then ETV, and radio is such an important part of that. First time I ever heard about you was when you were at YFM, because obviously I was in radio at the same time, so I was paying attention to that stuff. But the story of YFM is a great story, and there are lots of people involved. But you were there to watch some of the most cool things happen that had happened in independent radio.
Yes.
Probably since 702 was launched.
Yes, very much so. And there was a lot of cutting-edge stuff that we ended up doing. But I think the single thing that happened at YFM under my watch was the training program. So I put in place the Y Academy, and I personally ended up training 252 people during the course of the 10 years that I was there.
Jeez.
And they're all some of the biggest names that you have in radio today. Well, I remember you had that conversation with a bunch of the former YFM people. So you had, I think you had Fresh there and Greg Maloka and a bunch of others, and I think they were all telling you about the Y Academy and the amazing stuff that we ended up doing.
Okay, so you left there, and since then, I mean, you've really done a whole cornucopia of things, including, as I hinted at, the political party. The other thing about you that I've admired is that you don't look at any of these experiences and go, well, that was massively successful, this one was a failure. You look at all of them as being compounded into a totality of experience, which gives you the courage to go and try new adventures. And when you look at the political party, you obviously didn't get the seat in Parliament that we were hoping for. I mean, I voted for you. But it wasn't a waste of time.
No, not at all. And, well, I think, all of us who were involved at the time put in a fair amount of our time into it. And of course,
including your wife and like lots of cool
I mean,
people.
There was real money that got put into it. I mean, I've forked out 250,000 out of my own pocket for
just to register.
Yeah, for the election deposit. And again, I have no regrets at all at having done that, because what we were trying to do was to actually shift the conversation away from the doom and gloom stuff and actually focus on solutions. And I think to a large extent that actually kickstarted a lot of stuff in terms of how people began.
Have any of the political parties that are still around acknowledged that you gave them any ideas? Because some of them have been using some of your ideas.
Yeah, they have.
They have?
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, Musi is very quick to, come up with a 10-point plan and all of that kind of stuff, which is still on the ZACP website, by the way, if you go and
so you can see it there if you don't believe us.
And check it out. But again, the point was, we were very happy to have people steal the ideas.
Sure.
And it was kind of difficult to explain this to people. So, I'll use the YFM example at the training program. The kids, so there'd be 12 kids at a time that would be on the program. And I would walk them through everything in terms of the business. I'd take them through finances. I'd take them through business models. I'd tell them our strategic plans. And many of them would ask, they'd say, aren't you afraid that someone's going to take these ideas and steal them and use them?
Or steal the talent once you've trained them.
Yeah, but that was built into the program, because we train people at a faster rate.
In fact, you wanted that.
Yeah.
For them.
Yeah. Oh. Train people at a faster rate so that the industry keeps absorbing them. But they used to say, are you not afraid someone's going to steal these ideas? And I'd say, well, by the time they start implementing these ideas,
you're already far ahead.
We're already far ahead, and we're implementing the next batch of ideas. And really what we want is for people to start picking up these ideas and claiming them for themselves, and hopefully doing better things with them than we're doing. Because that's really how we grow as a country, right? It's not like, I mean, we grow the pie. It's not we all sharing the same pie.
Yeah, and that brings us to your latest project, which is this book. And you're giving very solid advice to anyone who wants to read it about how to fix South Africa. And a lot of this stuff is stuff you've spoken about on the show with me, with Pumi. But this idea of self-reliance and of resilience is, I think, a very common South African theme.
Yes.
We like to solve our own problems.
Yes.
We're not actually a nation that just sits and waits for things to happen.
I think look at one of the things about the interesting legacy of apartheid was that it did create among the Boers at the time a great sense of self-reliance. So a lot of stuff that could no longer be obtained from outside the country actually got done inside the country, just simply because needs must. I mean, so Sasol, for example, would never have come about if not for sanctions. You take the same viewpoint and you look in terms of what's happened in the recent past. So Israel, one of the reasons why I'm let's leave the Netanyahu's politics aside, and let's leave morality discussions of the war aside. But let's look at the psychological makeup of Israelis and their quest for self-sufficiency and their ability to invent new technologies.
It's
profound. Making the desert bloom. Just
profound.
Yes, the fact that you have a country in the desert that's a net exporter of food to the rest of the world, that in itself is a starting point. You look in terms of what's happened in the case of Russia, where the U.S. for the longest time said, "Oh, Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country."
Right, and they keep saying that the economy isn't actually; it's a third world economy and all that sort of thing. Yeah,
and you look at the astonishing range of stuff that's actually come out of that country. The fact of the matter is that the Russians are still the only people who are able to get an aircraft, to get a spacecraft up to the space station and then land it. Okay, so Elon has still been trying to work on that for quite a while. You know, we still so the West still does splashdowns in the ocean and that type of stuff. But you look at the fact that the U.S. space program actually existed for the past 10 years because of the fact that the Russians were nice enough to allow them to piggyback on rides up there to the space station.
You don't believe in American exceptionalism?
Listen, I'm a great fan of the United States. I love that country, and it gave me an education,
right?
You know, that I could never have dreamed of having otherwise, and you know, made some of the best friends ever. It's a country that's lost its way culturally because of the fact that it's this divisive critical race theory that's pulled the country apart, much to a large extent as we're losing our way out here because we're race obsessed.
Yeah, that's it, and it's just such a zero-sum game. Like nobody wins from this stuff because the zero sum is zero.
Yes.
But it amazes me that time and time again, people like you are able to find positive solutions to very, very serious problems. And when you write a book, which is ambitious to say how to fix South Africa, you mean it.
I do. Because all of the stuff that I'm putting forward there is there are things that if we do these very basic things, it can immediately make a huge difference in the lives of people.
You didn't want to call it "Make South Africa Great Again."
I think greatness is kind of a moving target, and this idea of greatness as being something that wasn't in the past doesn't sit well with me. I don't know,
because we should ever be improving.
Yes,
and technically that's the difference between a conservative and a reactionary, right? Is that the reactionary, like those Buddha you saw in their ox wagons on your way to UNISA, they want to take things backwards, whereas a conservative wants to keep things where they are and keep learning new things.
Yes,
and a liberal wants to change everything.
Yes,
and then a revolutionary just wants to burn it all down.
Yes. And we've seen how that ends up in so many parts of the world where things kind of fall apart.
What is your domestic life like? You have a wife and children. You love to cook. You are about as self-reliant as anyone I know. You have dogs. You have a snake.
Yes.
Talk me through this.
Look, it's relatively boring. So one of the things that
sounds like the Garden of Eden.
One of the things that
just one snake.
So there's a particular ritual that we're very big on, and that's the idea of the family sitting down around the dinner table and having dinner together. And I think the reason why that's important is it's a chance for everyone to actually come together and to have a conversation and
take an interest in each other.
Exactly.
You see so many people who are just so disconnected from their own families. No one's really caring about each other's lives. No one's particularly interested in what everyone does for a living. And that's where things unravel.
Well,
at that level, like that's where society is built.
Yes. Well, there are so many people who they will go home and plonk themselves in front of the TV and put a slice of pizza on their lap, and but we sit down at the table. There are knives and forks. We
do it properly.
We light candles, and it's just the sense of ritual. So most people say grace. We just light candles. We do raise our glasses and clink, and occasionally one of the kids would say. I'd like to drink to my having done 90% on my biology exam today, and so we all.
I've no doubt your children are getting 90% in their biology exams. But celebrating those small wins also with each other, builds the kind of sense of either ambition, which is a very good thing to have, and or confidence that you'll need in the real world.
Very much so. And I think that those rituals actually become very important because you can then extend that to the way in which you engage with the rest of society. Because if you have that basic respect for your family structure, you then end up having a sense of respect that filters through to your larger community.
Well, that's why I think it's relevant to discuss it with you, because when you talk about fixing the big things, you got to start with the things that are within your control, and family is the number one building block for all of this.
Yes.
What kinds of adults do you want your children to be?
I hope they never stop learning. So I think that's probably the single biggest thing. I think, certainly in terms of all of my kids, they're very considerate in terms of their engagement with other people. So, and I use that, in the sense that they're respectful in terms of how they engage with other people. They're likely to help, and they'll help you carry packages. They'll open doors for you, and it's that very basic level.
So they're basically not shits, is what you're saying.
I'd like to think that that fundamental level of politeness and is something
decency.
But look,
manners
to a large extent, that's something that we have in common as South Africans. I'd like to think.
Yeah.
So it's like the Afrikaans kids who will call any older person or I get called malume or ntate, and I like that. It's showing a basic respect for the fabric of society, and I think that's actually the building blocks of a successful nation. Rather than the kind of stomping and screaming that some political parties, particularly wearing red berets, happen to do these days.
Because they didn't ever sit down for dinner, and they weren't able to tell their parents what they're up to.
Sure.
And they didn't have that grounding. Maybe I'm just.
But also
speculating.
The idea of having conversations without taking it personally and shouting at each other, and it really is. It starts there.
I would love for you to be like everybody's lecturer. You talk about the students you taught radio. I'd love for you to just help people understand that arguing is actually a perfectly acceptable form of communication. And in fact, it could be the most valuable stuff you do. I love a good argument.
Yes.
We've got to learn to do that more. It's so nice to talk to you about this stuff, which really matters, because what are we going to do about Russia and the Ukraine or Israel and Gaza? This is the stuff that I think makes people tick. So It's lovely to sit and talk to you about it. Thank you, Kanthan.